To make himself feel better, Pluto hummed a melody that poured from his heart. It was a song filled with hope to find a friend who would be kind, a friend who would be fun, a friend who would like him for who he was.
This is Dr. Rochelle Lowden, aka Dr. Mia Rowe. Welcome to this episode of Apollo and Pluto's WishQuest, a companion podcast for my children's flip-over book, Apollo's Wish and Pluto's DreamQuest, published by the Vivens Media Group. In my book, music brings Apollo and Pluto together and helps them heal. I spoke about music and healing with Dr. Francis S. Collins, a physician, scientist, grandfather, and amateur musician. While serving as the director of the United States National Institutes of Health for 12 years, he launched many groundbreaking projects, including one that has brought neuroscientists, musicians, and music therapists together to learn from each other. We met over Zoom and talked about how music featured in his childhood, his career, and his faith. Enjoy our conversation. Welcome, Dr. Collins. From the moment we imagined this podcast series, I knew I wanted to have this conversation with you. You are a superstar in genetics research, and as a genetics researcher myself, I have long looked up to you. Another connection we share is a love for music. You are a musician, and I have performed with the dance troupe Chihamba in Charlottesville. Music is a major theme of Apollo's Wish and Pluto's DreamQuest. When did you first fall in love with music?
Oh, goodness, as far back as I can remember, this was part of my childhood in a way that was magical. I grew up on a farm. We didn't have a television. What we did after dinner was usually music. My dad played the violin, but he had taught himself to learn a lot of traditional American music. So you could also say he played the fiddle. And I figured out how to play a pump organ in our living room when I was 4 or 5 years old. It required you to pump the pedals or there was no sound. So my dad built stilts so that my short legs could reach and actually create some kind of music. And I would spend hours with that keyboard trying to figure out what notes sound good together and what notes don't sound so good together and what's a chord all about. And fell in love with the way in which music could just transport my spirits. And ultimately, took some lessons, but I wasn't very disciplined. So most of the music I know has been things I've learned by heart, figured out what to do. And then I picked up the guitar in high school because I was kind of a nerd and I needed to do something that would sort of help me have some kind of social life. And so the guitar was kind of helpful. I got into a really bad folk band, and the rest is history.
So I would love to hear more about what bands you've been in. I know you were in Nerds in Harmony. How
Oh,
many
yes.
bands have you been in?
Oh gosh, it must be 6 or 8 along the way since high school and college. And most recently at NIH, I've been part of the band called the Affordable Rock and Roll Act,
I
which
like it.
which is a rock and roll band, all made up of scientists, everything from postbacks to senior professors. And if I say so myself, we're pretty good, and we have a very good time.
I would love to get the chance to listen sometime.
Well, the band is a little bit on hiatus right now with everything that's happening at NIH, but we hope we'll get back together soon.
That sounds great. In my book, music brings Apollo and Pluto together. I heard on a podcast that you would have gatherings at your home and have guests sing in harmony.
Mhm.
I think that's a beautiful way to bring people together. Can you tell me why you started to do this and how effective you find it to bring people together?
Well, again, it carries me back to growing up. My parents would have sometime around the holidays a music party at the house and just invite whoever was available. And it would start, oh, maybe at 9 o'clock at night, and oftentimes not really close down until 4 a.m. And there would just be all kinds of musicians, not just in one gathering, but sometimes there would be somebody in the kitchen playing bluegrass and somebody upstairs in the hall doing original songs that they had written. And somewhere down the library, there'd be a sing along. And I loved that. And so my wife and I kind of tried to replicate that same kind of spirit in our own house. And so we will invite, even though we don't have a terribly big house, yeah, most recently 70 people showed up, and we have songbooks. And we hand out the songbooks so that everybody has the words in front of them, because sometimes that's a little hard to remember the second verse. And whoever has an instrument shows up. So there's usually a band that I try to lead of 4 or 5 people. Last time we had a fiddler, we had an upright bass, and occasionally a flute would show up. And we just encourage people, sing what you want to sing, pick something out of this book of 120 songs. We'll go with that. And it's wonderful. We invite specifically people who are on different political sides, because we need to get together these days. And nothing makes me happier than to have the room full of people singing and seeing somebody who's really very different in their political views with their arm around somebody else, singing harmony together. Like, okay, that's what we need more of. So I'm with you. Apollo and Pluto got the right idea. If you want to find a friend, if you want to find a way to bring your heart closer to somebody else's heart, music is an incredibly powerful way to do that.
I agree. Speaking of bringing people together in partnerships, you and renowned soprano Renee Fleming launched the initiative Sound Health to explore how music stimulates healthier bodies and minds. What gaps in science or society were you hoping to address with Sound Health?
Hmm. Well, quite a lot of ideas there. Part of it was to recognize that music can be a source of healing for people who are going through difficult medical circumstances, people with chronic pain, for instance, or people with depression, anxiety, PTSD. There's a whole field called music therapy that aims to assist in those circumstances by giving you something that's not a pill, but can also provide some relief and even some joy when you're in the midst of a tough time. But music therapy, which has been around since World War II, is mostly empirical, and you can hear wonderful success stories, but you can also hear circumstances where it just didn't work. And we don't really understand what the difference is between success and failure. But gosh, Mia, now that we're in the midst of, at NIH, this remarkably ambitious effort to understand how the brain works, with the Brain Initiative, which started 10 years ago, started by myself and President Obama, and for which we have recruited a lot of engineers and technologists and neuroscientists to work together to try to understand how those circuits work. Now we can start to really understand what is it that happens when you have a musical experience that lifts your spirits, that gives you a chill. Sometimes I find certain pieces of music make me cry when no matter how hard I try not to, it's just going to get me right there. What is that all about? And how can we use that information to make music therapy even more successful? That's kind of what sound health is about. So it brings together neuroscientists and musicians and music therapists and a whole bunch of other folks who care about this, and a lot of people do, to try to understand how we could advance the field. And because of this, which involved multiple institutes at NIH, and with the remarkable co-leadership of Renee Fleming, who's about the most inspiring soprano you can possibly imagine in this space, we ultimately were able to fund an additional $35 million worth of research to really get a better handle on what happens in interacting music and the brain, and how can we use that therapeutically.
That is very intriguing. Has the initiative evolved compared to your initial vision?
It has. The initial vision, we had a workshop for 2 days, basically trying to say, where are the research opportunities? And out of that came a pretty bold agenda, which even got published in Neuron, a very highly competitive neuroscience journal. And then we've tried to sort of build the various parts of the research program to meet those needs. Most recently, that's particularly focused on music and how it can help people in the aging arena. How does this assist, for instance, people who are beginning to struggle with cognitive deficits? How do you help people who've had a stroke and have had difficulty learning to speak again? It turns out you may not be able to speak after a stroke like this, but you can still sing. It's
That's
pretty
amazing.
remarkable when you see these experiences of people who have really not been able to say much, and you just say, well, can you sing the happy birthday song? And out it comes. And they're surprised too. And then you could take that experience and say, okay, well, then if you want to say, I love you to your wife or your husband, sing it. And you can do that. So there's a different circuit involved, I guess. This has been eye-opening and inspiring. And I think it's done a lot of good for a subset of people, but there's so much more that we could be doing. Unfortunately, right now, this project is in a little bit of a difficult space. It was a collaboration between NIH and the Kennedy Center and the National Endowment for the Arts. And both of those partners have come on hard times in 2025 with withdrawal of the support for their parts of this program. And the NIH team has kind of found it necessary to scale back a bit because of serious budget cuts and some sense on the part of somebody that this was not really solid science, which I totally disagree with. Totally disagree with. But Renee, who's become my good friend, is determined to keep this going, is seeking out some philanthropy to help with it.
Mhm.
I should tell you the story about how she and I met and how this whole thing got started, if you have time for it, because it's a pretty good story.
Yes, please do.
I didn't know Renee Fleming. I'm not an opera goer. I don't object to opera. It's just not something that's completely captured my attention. But I was at a party in 2015, 10 years ago, where a small group of people had been assembled on a summer evening for a dinner, and then afterwards to step outside and enjoy the evening air. But the dinner was a little tense. This was the last week in June, and the Supreme Court had just announced their final decisions. And one of the decisions was a 5-4 decision in favor of approving gay marriage. At the dinner were three Supreme Court justices uh, Antonin Scalia, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who were on opposite sides of this and wrote scathing commentaries to the other side. And Anthony Kennedy, who was the tiebreaker, who had voted in favor of. But it was very fresh, and everybody was edgy. So the dinner seemed a little awkward. We went outside afterwards. There was a bluegrass band that had been hired to play some music for the outside part of this. And I had been told by the organizer, hey, Francis, I know you know some bluegrass songs. Bring your guitar. Maybe you'll want to join the band. So I decided, what the heck? Sure, I'll go and join the band. And they were surprised that I know most of their tunes, but that's how I grew up. But it still wasn't really feeling all that good. And then this stunning woman comes out of the crowd and comes up to the band and says, maybe it would help if we decided to sing something. And I realized, oh my gosh, that's Renee Fleming. And she wants us to sing something. I hope it's not Puccini because I'm not good at that. But it turned out Renee is this incredibly eclectic admirer of all kinds of music. So quickly we figured out she knows a lot of the songs that I know. So we started out, we sang The Water is Wide. She sang lead, I sang harmony. It was like, we'd been doing this our whole lives, even though we just met. The oldest British folk song there is. And something happened. People stopped with surprise as her voice, which is so exquisite, sort of wafted through the night air. And then we figured, okay, let's find something they can all sing. We sang Country Roads because everybody knows that. We sang Shenandoah. I don't remember what else we came up with, but things that had a chorus. And the whole mood of the evening was completely different all of a sudden. And Scalia, who had been really grumpy about all of this, now was smiling, lifting his glass of brandy and his cigar, singing along lustily. Ruth Bader Ginsburg totally charmed. And she actually has spoken about this in part of her own autobiography about how this was such a special moment. Um, I will say Scalia did at one point say, Renee Fleming, you've wasted your time in opera. You should have been singing folk music all along. She nodded and he said, Francis Collins, you should keep your day job. Hey, wait a minute. We're a duet here. So we became friends that evening, and then it turned out she was about to start a year as an advisor to the Kennedy Center, and she was looking for a special project that she could throw herself into instead of just showing up now and then. And she was also interested, is there a way to bring science and music together? And I had thought about that a bit, and it was like a perfect, oh yeah, we can do this. And
Yes.
she has stuck with this. She has put so much of her time into this. Whenever she does a concert now, the first 15 minutes or so, she lectures the audience about music and science and how important it is to put them together. The best advocate, ambassador you could imagine for sound health.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that story. I have one more question regarding sound health in particular. Music is a universal experience, but access to music education and music therapy is not. Has sound health tried to address questions of access to ensure discoveries reach communities who might otherwise be left out?
Yes. And I don't know if we've had as much success as I would hope for, but we've sort of tried. With music education, one of the sad aspects of what's happened to elementary and middle school and high school education in the US is that music, which used to be kind of part of the enterprise in most schools, has gradually been sort of pushed aside as budgets got tight and people who didn't know better basically said, well, that's a frill. We can't do that. We've got to focus on teaching so they can do well on the standardized test. There's no standardized test on music. So we lost that connection. To get it back, Sound Health felt what we need to do is provide the evidence that music training in childhood is actually something that really expands your capabilities even beyond learning to play an instrument to other areas. So we funded some research in that regard, and it's quite clear that musical training, especially if you start early, right, age 4, 5, 6, 7, expands also your language capabilities, which is really interesting because language is also about sound, and music is teaching you how to tell the difference between this note and that note, but language is musical too. So kids that have more intense musical training pick up languages quicker and more effectively and more skilled in their use of language. And probably this spills over into mathematics as well. So that data's there. And I have done my best to try to convince people who have some role in decisions about public education to bring music back to the schools. Unfortunately, the reaction often is, oh, we just can't afford it. So we've got more work to do there, but more evidence would help. So that's part of the goal here, is to collect more projects like that. In terms of music therapy, again, that's a problem. Music therapy is not accessible to people unless you have resources to pay for it. Third-party payers these days, in general, will not cover the cost of music therapy because they're not convinced that it has value. I'm convinced it has value. But in order to prove that, we need to have really rigorous, randomized, controlled trials to show the data that for somebody with, for instance, PTSD, that this can improve outcomes. If we have that data, and some of those studies are now underway, supported by NIH and rigorously designed, then maybe we can convince CMS, which often sets the stage for what's going to be paid for and what isn't, and third-party insurers to start paying for it, which would be a wonderful advance. Because right now, music therapists can really only make a living if they charge for their services, and a lot of people can't pay.
Well, I will be continuing to follow sound health and looking forward to more discoveries. In my book, Pluto is being bullied and finds comfort through music.
Yeah.
What is your view on how listening to music during childhood can shape a child's emotional, cognitive, or social development?
Well, we have some data about that, although I wish we had more. It's certainly the case, as I mentioned, that music does have power to expand brain development in ways that spin off in other capabilities as well. If you look at a brain scan, an MRI or a CT of a child that's had intense musical training before the age of 7, you can actually see the difference. The acoustic cortex, which is where sound comes in and gets processed, is larger in a child who's had a musical training. And that persists throughout life. That tells you the brain is responding to things around it. And music can be a very important way to shape those neuronal circuits. And music can certainly provide for kids who are going through tough times a source of relief, of encouragement, of sort of lifting themselves out of a dark space, just like for Pluto, where the music was the thing that kept him somewhat reassured, even though he was being bullied by his classmates. Um, so, just as with adults, I think music can take us to a really important place, a place that can be peaceful. Of course, sometimes it can be heavy metal and not peaceful at all. It can be a sort of a release of energy as well. But it has that ability to transform our daily experience. And the more we figure out how that works and figure out how to apply it more successfully for kids and for adults, the better off we'll be.
Yes, I agree. And I know you are a person of faith.
Yes.
Physics professor Michael Pravica proposed that creativity and perhaps even music might emerge from higher dimensions or the soul. What are your thoughts about where music comes from?
That is a great question. I mean, I can be a rigorous scientist and say, well, it's vibrations in air, and it has the ability to vibrate your eardrum, which then through the cochlea transitions this into electrical signals. Well, yeah, but that doesn't say very much, does it? That's like looking at a score for Beethoven's Third Symphony, my favorite of his, and being able just by looking at the page to know why it would touch you. No, you've actually got to immerse yourself in the experience of hearing it. Um, I I think it's clear to anybody who's been touched by music in certain ways that you can't quite explain what that is doing. It gets you into the spiritual zone, not just into the purely materialistic zone. When I mentioned the Beethoven's Third Symphony, if you started playing for me the second movement, which is the incredible C minor, very somber piece, I'll be transfixed. I will probably not be able to avoid crying. It is so powerful, those strains of the strings playing that second movement. And it links back to various experiences that I will remember of what I was doing when I heard that before. But that touches my soul. That's not just some neurotransmitters going on. And as a person of faith, I think we're supposed to notice that. What are the things that call you to the idea that maybe the material world is not everything, that there's something spiritual, and maybe even that there's God out there trying to reach you, that you want to reach back? Beauty, for me, is one of those really compelling things. And beauty comes in all sorts of frames, of course. It could be visual, it could be a beautiful sunset, it could be something in nature, but it could also be music. Another one that gets me, always at Christmas, I listen to the great strains of Handel's Messiah. And people oftentimes just sort of say we're done when they get to the Hallelujah chorus. No, there's a whole nother part of the Messiah that goes on after that. And the very last piece is the great Amen. The only words to this fairly long piece of music are Amen. They say it over and over again. But near the end of that, there is this moment where the sopranos go up to this high A, and the rest of the chorus is really belting it. And the sopranos come down note by note by note. And it feels like the whole world is going to come apart. And in fact, it sort of feels like it did because they stop at this crashing A seventh where I'm being a little too technical here, but the bass is playing the seventh, which you're not supposed to do. It's very discordant. It feels like, oh, you've just left me in a terrible place with this chord. And then after that pause, it all gets resolved back into a satisfying, incredibly joyful conclusion in the D major that you knew had to be out there somewhere, but it took a long time to get there. What is that? I can't listen to that without feeling like I'm a spiritual being. I've been lifted into a space that is both incredibly beautiful, but almost painfully, exquisitely longing. That, I guess that's the word. It makes you long for something. You can't put words on it. It's sort of like, oh, this is what I was meant to be, but I only get to glimpse it for a minute. Maybe sometime after I'm gone, that's where I'm headed.
I relate to all of that. There's a particular song that as I was trying to imagine how are these two characters going to meet in my book, this song made me feel like I was floating. And that's what inspired my idea that it would be music that carries Pluto to Apollo.
Ah, I wondered about that, Mia, because reading the book and seeing how music was so transporting, what music did you have in mind that Pluto's mom might have been singing, or that Apollo might have been singing when he was longing for a friend? You had something specific there?
No, not specific, because as you were mentioning earlier, your gatherings at your home and people singing, I was thinking I would not be able to sing in harmony. But my son does love my voice, and he was part of the inspiration for this book. And I sing him a good morning song. I will not
Ah,
sing it now, but I can say the words. Good morning, good morning. I love you. You're special. Good morning, good morning. Today's going to be a good day. And even on the toughest days when he doesn't want to get out of bed, that usually brings him around to actually getting up and facing the day.
wonderful. That's perfect.
Yes, yes. So we definitely share that connection of music between us. And even when he was little and I was like changing his diaper, I was singing him George Michael and Michael Jackson and Prince. So I think he thinks I was a genius because I made up all of these songs.
Well, someday he'll find out. Wait a minute, somebody else sang that song. That was not
He
my
knows
mom.
now.
Oh, he's
He's
figured it
9.
out.
He's 9. He's figured it out. I was also wondering, what are your thoughts on artificial intelligence being used to make music?
You know, it bothers me a bit. If music is some kind of spiritual connection that we have with each other and maybe even with God, to insert something that's really not spiritual, just an AI tool in there, seems like it might change the whole spectrum of things. I'm a fan of what AI can do for medicine, and I'm thrilled when people in my former lab are using it to figure out how the human genome functions. But when it gets into this space and begins, especially if it starts to displace human creativity, because we don't need composers anymore, we'll just let AI create the next musical breakthrough. Something doesn't feel right. This feels like music is something uniquely human and shouldn't be considered displaceable by something artificial. But I confess that's probably not a shared view of a lot of people. And some people will say, well, if AI can make even better music than people can, well, bring it on. But will it be better, or will be something missing there without that human spirit? I think so far what I've heard in terms of AI generated music doesn't seem too much like a threat to Beethoven, but we'll see if they get better.
I agree. And I have a few other fun questions for you.
Fire away.
Say a spaceship were to arrive and descend upon you, demanding, play us one song. What song would you play as an example of who we are as humankind?
Oh, that's a tough one to think about. Hmm. Having grown up surrounded by folk music and wanting maybe to have a little bit of a sense of what we are as a people, I might just have to play This Land Is Your Land,
Mm.
the Woody Guthrie anthem, which was, by the way, a protest song at the time. It was not all Christian nationalism, that's for sure. It was more about, okay, we're supposed to care about everybody. How we doing? Uh, we should think about that right now.
Yes, indeed. I think that's very timely. Apollo's Wish and Pluto's Dream Quest is going to be a favorite book for a lot of kids. What has been your favorite book to read to your children and grandchildren?
Hmm. Yeah, it's been a while since I was reading to children because they're now in their 50s, or even to grandchildren who are now in their 20s. So I have to dig back a little bit here in terms of that. I always loved reading The Wizard of Oz in the original book. That was the first book that I really fell in love with as a kid. I didn't even know there was a movie. I just thought there was a book, and I even turned the book into a play, wrote out a script, and got some other kids to help perform it with me, and then discovered later, oh, there's a movie people could go see about it. So yeah, that would be one. Fairy tales, I always loved. I had this book of Grimm's fairy tales that includes some of the classics like, Rumpelstiltskin and Hansel and Gretel and all that. And those were always fun because there was usually a moral in there somewhere. It wasn't as silly as it sounded. Sometimes they're a little gruesome. Not all fairy tales seem to have happy endings, but I think they were useful for kids kind of getting their heads around what the world is potentially all about.
Definitely. And this is just for my own curiosity. How does your creative process for science compare to your creative process for music?
Uh, it's a good question. It is different. Having had the privilege of serving as a physician scientist initially at Michigan and then at NIH for some 32 years, my science creativity is often triggered by an idea or maybe a patient that I met who had a puzzling circumstance that I couldn't figure out and nobody else had really studied yet. My lab studies progeria, for instance, this rarest form of premature aging, which I first got interested in by trying to take care of a person who had this and realizing, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't understand what the cause of this is. How do we sort this out? And ultimately, we found the misspelling in DNA that causes it. And we're within a year of potentially trying to achieve a cure with gene editing, which would be quite an amazing thing. So it started with sort of an appreciation of a mystery that needs somebody to work on it and that might actually help somebody. That's often the way my projects in the lab have started up. But then, if you're going to pursue that, you've got to be very rigorous about your experimental design. You can't just hope that your experiment will work out without having designed it properly and having the right controls and all of that. So there's a certain mindset there that gets more rigorous and digital and demanding that everything is taken care of just the right way. Music, on the other hand, maybe has the same start point of a sense of a mystery, a need, something you want to work on to express yourself. And you don't want to get too rigorous at that point. You want to kind of let the parts of your brain that you aren't always in control of take over a little bit. don't don't suppress the innovative parts. Let them run wild and just see what happens. I'm a songwriter. I don't do it easily. There's always this struggle when the song is happening about trying to get too rigorous too soon. I mean, you do have to have a tune, yes, and you do have to have lyrics that have a meter that matches the tune. Otherwise, it comes out all garbled. So you got to have some of that, but don't do it too soon. Try to get started first with something that's beyond what you thought your brain was capable of and see what happens. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yes, I agree. Do you remember what it was like picking up guitar for the first time and what made you fall in love with that, maybe more than other instruments?
I do remember. Um, Again, my keyboard was my first musical experience, and that kept me satisfied from about age 4 until maybe 14 or 15. Um, but then it wasn't transportable. And if you were trying to be involved in music in a way that involved other people, you couldn't pick up your piano and take it with you. And there weren't a whole lot of transportable keyboards. So I got to have something I can play that I can join in with other people. I had seen a lot of guitar playing at that point because, again, my dad, having been very interested in traditional music, We would have people come to our little farmhouse and sometimes play all evening and watching what could be done. And I guess I decided it was time for me to give it a shot. And I had a good friend in high school who had the same idea that he wanted to learn as well. And his dad gave us a ride to Washington, D.C., a very far off place from our little town in the Shenandoah Valley. And I bought my first guitar for $35. It was a horrible guitar. It was like so hard to play because the strings were way up off the fretboard and you had to really work hard to push them down and get a clean sound. But I was not going to be deterred. And I guess just picking out, and maybe I had a book somewhere to tell you what would be the right place to put your fingers to make certain chords. And little by little, it started to be like, okay, this is not as horrible. I think guitar, you can learn, 4 or 5 chords and play them reproducibly without having to think about it too much in a matter of a week or two if you're just strumming. And then I decided the strumming was a little boring. And the other thing I did at that point was I decided I'm going to be a finger picker. I don't want to just have one flat pick that I do this. I want to be able to use all my fingers. And I even invested in buying picks that fit on your fingers so that you can make a little bit cleaner and a little bit louder sound than if you're just plucking with bare fingers. Um, and that really made a difference. That made me a little bit different than the other people who were just strumming away with their flat pick. So I invested a lot in learning how to do fancy finger picking styles. And mostly, as I said earlier, it was a chance to be a social being instead of just a nerd. And I was struggling with that a lot at 14 and 15.
I heavily identify as nerd. It's one of my primary identities. I'm very proud of it. So thank you for sharing that. I understand it might be different for men.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
So this is my final question for you. In my book, Apollo experiences loneliness and Pluto has troubles with bullying, but the kindness they find in each other help them both to heal. What makes a good friend?
What a great question. And I love this about your book. I mean, that both of these boys have something that is an ache for them, and they're seeking some way to understand it and to find some relief, and they find it in each other, even though they had different aches. In a certain way, they were both seeking friendship, that they could be themselves and not have to pretend to be something else. What makes a good friend? I'm fortunate to have had a few, including some that have been almost lifelong. It is that sense of being accepted 100% for who you are. You don't have to put on airs. You don't have to pretend. You can be just as clear about your flaws as you are about the things you're happy and proud of, and it's okay. The whole package is acceptable to your friend, and same with them. And so that's a circumstance where you don't have to tiptoe around a difficult issue. You can go right there and not have this fear of being judged or somehow misunderstood in a way. So that has to be something that's a little hard to identify when it's happening, but you know it. When you get passing the point of being an acquaintance to being a friend, somebody that you can say, I feel totally safe with you. And I can say, I love you. You are somebody who has reciprocated this kind of affection in a way that makes my whole being feel warm and loved and accepted. We don't find that without working at it. I worry now that with so many of the distractions, particularly screens, that it's harder for people to develop those really close, trusting relationships. It was easier for me when there weren't those distractions growing up. But I sure hope as we begin to understand the importance of keeping people off those screens, especially kids, that there's more chances for that to happen now, because I think that would go a long way towards encouraging people to think positive things about their lives. I worry that at the moment we are in a circumstance where a lot of young people, particularly adolescents, are struggling with anxiety, with depression, with bullying, with self-worth images that are not helped by Instagram. And the best antidote to that is to have some real friends, not chatbot friends. Those are something I think is actually kind of troubling. Real people with whom you can be yourself and let them be themselves. And you learn so much about yourself as a result. So, yeah, Apollo and Pluto model that pretty well. I don't know what happens at the end of the book, though. It sort of feels like, oh, they want to get together again. There must be a sequel, right?
And you can come back for that. And we can discuss that as well.
Good. I wouldn't want to leave them in that state of uncertainty about whether their friendship can go on.
Yes, indeed. At the end, Apollo is falling asleep and feels a sensation of falling. So that's a hint.
Okay,
You
I
got to
think
go
I
back and
could.
read it again.
That sounds good. I love the way you did the book from both perspectives. So that we initially, at least the way I read it, we read the story from Apollo's view, and then you turn the book upside down, and now you see Pluto's description of the same events. That's a nice insight into how a friendship develops, because it isn't a one-sided thing. If it's a real friendship, it's got to be both, and you showed that.
Thank you. Yes, I enjoyed writing it so much. There was so much serendipity along the way, and it's been a wonderful journey.
And your artist is pretty good.
Yes, Paula Moniz is very talented. She really captured the magic and was so
Yes.
great to work with. When I wanted little adjustments, she was right on it.
Yeah. No, it's very compelling.
Well, thank you so much for spending time with me, talking about the book and your childhood and our love for music.
Well, Mia, it's been a pleasure. I'm glad you put this book together. Hope it touches some hearts like it did mine. And I'm glad the music part will come through as well as a way in which we can lift our spirits at times where we need to, which is a lot of times. So thank you. It's a gift.
Thank you so much. It was really nice catching up with you as well.
Likewise.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can order Apollo's Wish and Pluto's DreamQuest at vivinsmedia.com or through your favorite retailer or by supporting your local bookstore and requesting it there. This is Dr. Mia Rowe signing off. For my little one and all the big dreamers with big imaginations, keep dreaming.